My name is Bianca. I'm 39 years old. I'm a commercial airline captain flying long-haul routes out of Miami. And while I was mid-flight over the Atlantic in July 2025, my mother-in-law sold 40 acres of my late husband's family land that belonged to me, using a power of attorney that had expired 11 months earlier. I want to show you the exact moment the county clerk's office found the filing date that proved it. But first you need to understand how a woman who cried at my wedding ended up forging a real estate closing behind my back while I was 35,000 feet in the air. Picture this: a county records office in rural Georgia, August 14th, 2025, 10:15 in the morning, a clerk named Dolores Fenwick sliding a document across the counter and telling me, plainly, that the power of attorney used to sell my land had legally expired before the sale ever closed. That's where this ends. Let me walk you through how we got there. If you're watching, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment, and this particular kind of betrayal from someone who's supposed to be family through marriage hits different than most. I married Thomas Ashford in 2016. His family had owned 120 acres outside Statesboro, Georgia, for 4 generations, mostly pecan orchards, since the 1930s. Thomas's mother, Delphine, had run the family trust that held the property since her husband's death in 2009, and when Thomas died suddenly of an aneurysm in 2022, at 37, the land passed to me, his only heir, per the trust's own explicit terms, which Delphine herself had drafted alongside her late husband decades earlier. Thomas used to tell me, in the early years of our marriage, that his mother had built her entire sense of purpose around that orchard after his father died. Waking before dawn to walk the rows herself, negotiating every equipment lease personally, refusing for years to hire a full-time manager because she considered outside help a kind of quiet failure on her part. I understood, even before Thomas died, that the land wasn't just property to Delphine. It was the last structure holding together a version of herself she wasn't sure existed without it. I think that understanding is part of why I extended her so much patience for so long, even when her coldness toward me never fully thawed the way I kept hoping it eventually would. Delphine had never fully accepted me, not in 6 years of marriage, not even after Thomas's death. She wanted him to marry a local girl, someone rooted in Statesboro the way the family itself was rooted there, not a career pilot who spent a third of her life in the air, and in Delphine's own words at our engagement dinner in 2015, wouldn't know the first thing about keeping up land like this. I let that comment go. The way you let things go when you're 29 and in love and don't yet understand how long resentment can quietly compound. After Thomas's death, I granted Delphine a limited power of attorney in September 2022, allowing her to handle routine agricultural decisions on the property, crop leases, equipment maintenance, day-to-day orchard management. While I processed my grief and figured out from Miami what I actually wanted to do with land I'd never expected to inherit alone. That power of attorney, drafted by our family attorney at the time, explicitly expired after 1 year in September 2023, a limitation I'd specifically requested because even in grief, some part of me understood I needed to eventually make my own decisions about what Thomas had left me. The binary choice moment came in early 2024, when Delphine asked me to renew the power of attorney indefinitely, arguing that managing the property remotely from Miami made no practical sense for either of us. I declined gently, telling her I planned to visit more regularly and handle decisions myself going forward, with her continued input as someone who genuinely knew the land better than I ever would. Delphine's tone cooled noticeably after that conversation, though she never said anything overtly hostile, just a gradual, familiar distance settling back into our relationship. If you've ever watched an in-law's warmth cool the exact moment you stop needing them to manage something on your behalf, you know exactly the shift I'm describing. Drop a comment if that's familiar. Through 2024 and into 2025, I visited Statesboro roughly every 6 weeks between flight rotations, and the relationship, while never fully warm, remained functional. What I didn't know was that in the spring of 2025, a development company had approached Delphine directly about purchasing 40 acres of the property's northern section for a proposed subdivision, offering $1.8 million, a figure Delphine, I'd later learn, found genuinely difficult to imagine passing up, especially for land she'd spent decades believing should have stayed fully within the family's control, rather than becoming mine through a marriage she'd never fully embraced. The sale closed on July 22nd, 2025, while I was flying a round-trip route to London, entirely unreachable for the 14 hours the transaction took to finalize. Delphine had presented the developer's title company with the original 2022 power of attorney document. And this is the detail that still unsettles me most. Either failed to mention or actively obscured that the document had expired nearly 2 years earlier. The title company's own closing attorney, it would later come out, hadn't checked the expiration date closely enough before processing the sale, an oversight that would end up costing his firm significantly more than the closing fee they'd earned. I found out 3 weeks later, in August, when a property tax notice addressed to the development company arrived at my house by mistake, forwarded from an old address. I remember standing in my kitchen reading a tax document for land I still believed I fully owned, addressed to a company I'd never heard of, and feeling a very specific, cold confusion settle over me before the actual shape of what had happened became clear. I called Thomas's old family attorney first, a semi-retired man named Elliot Grumman who'd handled the original trust paperwork, and he confirmed, checking his own files while I sat on the phone barely breathing, that no new power of attorney had ever been drafted or filed after the original 2022 document expired. Whatever had authorized that sale, he told me, it wasn't anything his office had prepared. I drove to Statesboro within 2 days and went straight to the county records office, where Dolores Fenwick, a clerk who'd worked there for over 20 years, pulled the filing for me without hesitation. The power of attorney attached to the closing documents was dated September 2022, with an explicit 1-year expiration clause printed directly on the document's second page, a clause Dolores herself pointed out immediately, before I'd even finished reading the first page myself. "Ma'am," she said, "this expired in September of 2023. Whoever used this to close a sale in July of 2025 used an invalid document, plain and simple." She pulled up the digital timestamp on the recorded deed for me too, showing the exact minute the transfer had been filed, a piece of specificity I hadn't expected to need, but that Carla would later tell me made the eventual settlement negotiation move considerably faster than it otherwise might have. If you've ever discovered that a piece of paper you signed years earlier, in good faith, had been quietly reused long after it should have meant anything at all, you understand exactly the specific violation I'm describing. Tell me in the comments if you've experienced anything close to it. I hired a real estate litigation attorney in Savannah, a sharp, direct woman named Carla Whitcomb, who confirmed within days that the sale was voidable given the expired authorization, and that Delphine's use of an expired power of attorney to convey property she didn't personally own could expose her to both civil liability and, depending on intent, potential fraud charges. Carla also uncovered something I hadn't considered, that the development company's own attorney had a documented history, from 2 other transactions in the county, of failing to verify authorization documents thoroughly before closing, a pattern that would matter enormously in how quickly this got resolved. Carla requested a meeting with Delphine before filing anything formally, giving her the chance to explain herself honestly, the same courtesy I don't think she ever expected to receive from me, given how she'd always quietly assumed I lacked the patience for anything involving the land she considered truly hers to protect. We met at Carla's office in Savannah on August 28th, 2025. Delphine arrived with her own attorney, composed at first, repeating a version of events in which she genuinely believed the original authorization remained valid. Carla, calmly, placed the original 2022 document on the table, the expiration clause circled in red, and asked Delphine directly whether she remembered discussing the 1-year limitation when the document was originally drafted. Delphine's composure faltered for the first time. "I remember," she said quietly after a long pause. "I remember exactly why you wanted it limited, too. You wanted to make sure that eventually this would be your decision, not mine. And I think some part of me never fully accepted that Thomas leaving everything to you meant I had to actually let go of land my own family built with our hands for 4 generations. When the developer's offer came in, I told myself I was still the one who understood this property best, and that made the paperwork technicality feel smaller than it actually was. It wasn't a full admission of intentional fraud, But it was the first honest sentence Delphine had offered me in over a decade of knowing her, and I noted it, quietly, the way I've learned to note everything since Thomas died. The resolution came through a negotiated rescission rather than a drawn-out lawsuit. The development company's title insurance ultimately covered the unwinding of the sale, since their own closing attorney's failure to verify the expired authorization exposed their firm to the greater liability. The $1.8 million was returned to the developer, the land reverted fully to me, and Delphine, as part of the settlement, agreed to a formal, notarized acknowledgement relinquishing any further authority over the property, current or future, permanently. Delphine and I speak occasionally now, mostly brief, careful calls around holidays. She sent flowers on the 3rd anniversary of Thomas's death this year, the first time she's done that since he passed. I don't know yet what our relationship looks like 5 years from now, but I know I stopped needing her approval to make decisions about the one piece of my husband I have left, and that, more than the land itself, is the thing I think I actually needed to win back. I think if you've made it this far, the thing worth remembering tonight is this. An expired document doesn't stop meaning something just because someone convinces themselves the reasons behind its limits no longer apply to them. And you're allowed to give people you love genuine authority over something that matters to you, while still protecting, in writing, the exact moment that authority is supposed to end. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, drop a like, and tell me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs it. I'll see you in the next one.